Good morning, everybody. It's Sunday, March the 31st. This will be our virtual Sunday school lesson for this week. Hopefully, everybody's having a great day thus far. Um, and, appreciate y'all coming this morning, listening to us. Just in a word of prayer, and then we'll get into the lesson that the Lord's provided for us this morning. Dear God, we come to you this morning, Lord. We just thank you for letting us be able to gather together virtually, Lord. Just thank you for giving us the means to do this, Lord. We just pray that you be with us now, God. Just pray that you lead, guide, and direct us as we study your word together, dear Lord. And just let us absorb everything that you've laid out for us, dear God, and just let us be able to use it and apply it in our lives, Lord. We just thank you for the beautiful weather we're having this morning, Lord. We just thank you for always being with us and blessing us so greatly, dear Lord. In your precious name, I pray. Amen. All right, so last week we continued talking about David. We saw David go from just being a little shepherd boy, taking care of his father's sheep, to being a high-ranking official in in Saul's military, and he's there next to Saul. He's only one of the few that get that I guess speak directly to Saul that are still there. You got Abner and I think David and Jonathan. All those are probably leaders, and there's probably some more that I didn't really study. But that's David God has really blessed David and helped him achieve those things and put him in those places to prepare him to be king later on. And we saw that David had favor with Saul, and that has changed now. Now Saul has a hatred for David. He's jealous of David. He has a hatred of David, and he's been trying to kill him. And what we saw in chapter 19 was that David, Saul tried to kill David, and then David, he went home. Michal helped David escape from Saul's spies. Where she put the dummy in his bed, and told the spies that he was sick when they came to get him. And Saul said, I don't care. I'm going to kill him. It don't matter if he's sick or well. He can die if he's sick or it don't matter that. So go back and get him. So if nothing else, she bought him some time. So he fled and did that. Remember, he went to Samuel at Ramah, and then they went to Naioth, and remember Saul kept sending people to get David. He figured out where he was at, and he sent people to get him. And every time they would go, God would basically, the Holy Spirit would come upon them, and they would prophesy with Samuel and wouldn't go back to Saul. And Saul did this 3 times, and then finally Saul said, "I'm going to go myself." And so Saul was there, and when Saul went, the same thing happened to him. The Spirit of the Lord came upon him, and he prophesied too. So during that time, and that's what we get into in chapter 20, is now while Saul's there doing that, David comes back to the kingdom, and he finds Jonathan, and he's trying to get, he talks to Jonathan. He says, your dad's still trying to kill me again, and just trying to figure out why. And remember last time Saul was mad at David. He tried to kill him. David talked to Jonathan, and he went and talked to Saul and kind of smoothed everything over, and said Saul realized, hey, I shouldn't be trying to kill David. David didn't do anything wrong. And but now it's the same thing. David goes back to Jonathan. He says, hey, your dad's trying to kill me again. Has he said anything to you? Why? What's the reasoning? Does he have a legitimate reason? Have I done something wrong? And so chapter 20 is what we saw last week was mostly a dialogue between David and Jonathan, where they're talking. Jonathan basically promises David. He said, I'll do anything I can to help you. My dad hadn't said anything to me about planning to kill you or any of that stuff. And if he was going to do that, he would let me know. I would know about it. And he hadn't said anything to me. So, but David, he knows Saul's mad at him, and that Saul's trying to kill him. So Jonathan says, they come up with this plan. Um, David says, and that's what we started at last week. We start seeing, Jonathan offers. He says, I'll do anything you want me to do. I'll do anything I can to help you. I love you. You're my best friend, and anything I can do to help you, I'll do it. And so David already has an idea. He said, the feast of the new moon, or the I forget how it's. I don't think it's worded that way, but that's basically what they were having. They were having a 3 day feast where they would go and eat with Saul. It almost seems like they're eating supper with Saul for 3 days in a row. But he's saying, what I'm going to do, I'm not going to come to that, and you're going to see how your dad reacts to me not being there. And based on his reaction, we'll know my standing with him. And so Jonathan agrees. He said, okay, I'll tell you what, you hide out in the field here, and I'll come and signal you. And they come up with a plan to, David's plan was that if when Saul noticed that he was gone, that Jonathan was supposed to tell him, hey, I gave David permission to go to his family to return home because his family was having a feast and his brother requested him to be there, and I sent him away. I gave him permission to leave, and so that's what he was going to tell him. And then they come up with a plan how Jonathan was to communicate the answer to David. And basically, he told David to hide out in the field for 3 days. And he said, what I'll do is I'll come out here with my bow. I'll shoot some arrows, and if they go this way, that means you're good. You can come on back in. There's no problems. If I tell him to go, they're ahead of him, then that means you're in big trouble, and it's time for you to go. Saul's mad and he wants to kill you. So, and then one of the last things David tells Jonathan, he says, if I have done something wrong, and your dad has legitimate evidence and proof, and something that needs, where I deserve to die, then I would rather you kill me and take my body to your dad than for you to take me to him alive, because it'll be a whole lot worse if that happens. So he makes Jonathan promise that he would do that. And of course, I think David knows he hasn't done anything wrong, but who knows who could have brought false accusations against him or whatever, and gave Saul a legitimate reason for that. But he's telling Jonathan, if that's happened, I would rather, if I'm going to die, I'd rather you kill me than for you to turn me over to Saul, because who knows what Saul's going to do to me. So Jonathan agrees, and Jonathan, again, he promises to, and they make I guess a covenant is what they would call it. Is they agree to always be friends and to always bless each other's descendants. If anything happens to the other one, they said, we'll take care of each other, our families, and we'll do our best to help each other out. So they agree to that, and then Jonathan also agrees that if and remember we talked about the great friendship between David and Jonathan several weeks ago, and we still see that no matter what they went through, they're still great friends, and they're still wanting to help each other, wanting to serve the Lord together, and again, that's what we should be seeking in friends, and to have great friends like Jonathan and David, that's a huge blessing from God, and if we have people like that, we should be thankful for it. But anyway, Jonathan, let's see, where are we at? They made a covenant, and basically Jonathan says, if I do anything wrong and I don't, if I lie to you, David, or I'm deceitful to you or anything like that, if I'll take your place. Basically, is what he's agreeing to do. He says, if you're killed, if you shouldn't be killed and you get killed, then the same thing. I'll agree that the same thing can happen to me. If you are unjustly killed, and I'm going to do everything I can to help you. If it's a result of something I do wrong, then I'm willing to die too. If I cause you harm, is basically I think the way what Jonathan's trying to say there. And again, that shows you how much Jonathan and David love each other. So Um, so now David's hiding in the field. Jonathan tells him, if again, I'll go and I'll talk to my dad. Or we'll see how the feast goes on these 3 days, and then I'll tell you the results, and I'll come shoot the arrows. So David hides in the field. He's waiting, and Saul has everybody to eat like he normally does. His plan for the I guess they did every time there was a new moon, and so the first day, the Bible tells that Saul notices that David's not there. He sees that he's not there. He doesn't really say anything. He just thinks that it's that he's not clean, that he's done something to make himself unclean, so he's unworthy to come to the table. So, that's what the Bible tells us. He thinks the first day. So he's looking and says, well, David's messed up somewhere and done something wrong, so he's not here. So maybe he needed a day to get clean. He should be here tomorrow. So that's what he does. He doesn't really ask any questions the first day. Then the second day comes, and Saul says, where's David at? Why ain't he came here? And it'd be a great honor to be invited to come sit at the king's table. And Saul, I think he took it as kind of like a disrespect not being there, because, again, it'd be a great honor to be there. And he's saying, David's basically saying, I'm not worth him coming to sit at my table. He'd rather go sit at his brother's table and be there for that. And Saul, we know Saul's jealous, and Saul's already looking to kill David, and this just gives him something to kind of another reason, another accusation he can bring against him that he can say he deserves to die because of. But anyway, he asks where is David at, and Jonathan says, hey, he asked me if he could go to his brother's house, and so I let him go. And what Saul's reaction? Saul's mad at Jonathan. He gets mad at Jonathan. And he says, it's you've chosen the son of Jesse, and he does. And you know that and we didn't talk about this last week, but Saul's disposition towards David has changed, because he doesn't call him David anymore. He calls him the son of Jesse. So it's not the same, So something's changed, and you can see that in how Saul refers to David. He says the son of Jesse. You chose the son of Jesse. And he's already mad because Michal. She helped David over Saul in the previous chapter. So now his daughter's turn and helped David instead of him. We already know the people like David more than him. That's what started the whole Saul being jealous of David. Was the people singing praises to David, that David did more than Saul in the war. And now Jonathan, which is it's one of David's. It's Saul. He's been there with Saul in battle. I believe he's one of Saul's military leaders, and they're and I don't know all Jonathan's Jonathan had brothers. I can't remember how many right now off the top of my head, but we see a lot more about Jonathan's interaction with David and the great achievements that Jonathan makes in the wars with the Philistines and things like that. So, we know that Saul loves Jonathan, and they have a great relationship. They fought wars together, and so when Jonathan chooses David over Saul, it's another one of those things where it's just going to make Saul madder and make him more jealous of David. So, but we know, the reason that they did is because David's done nothing wrong, and Saul's trying to kill him. So they're in the right in choosing David, because he's the one that's just in this situation, not Saul. So let's see. I know we read verse 31 last week, but we're going to pick back up in verse 31. So 1 Samuel chapter 20, verse 31 is where we're going to start at, and we should be able to finish chapter 20 today. So let's see, verse 31, and this is Saul still speaking to Jonathan. So Jonathan just told him that David is, he gave David permission to leave, and Saul's mad at him, and so Saul's still talking to Jonathan, and again right here, verse 31 says, "For as long as the son of Jesse," he's not calling him David anymore, "liveth upon the ground, thou shalt not be established, nor thy kingdom. Wherefore now send and fetch him unto me, for he shall surely die." So basically, it's saying, you're choosing David. David is, David is going to be greater than you. As long as David's alive, he's the people love him more than they do you. And if anything happens to me, the people can make him king because there's so much love for David. And we'll see that in the next chapters. The Achish says, he calls David king of the land. So, and we know because Samuel anointed him as king, and God's plan is for him to be king. But I don't think anybody else knew that yet. I mean, Saul might know it. He might have put it together and deduced it, but I don't think, there's not been any kind of official announcement or anything like that, because, Saul would have been trying to kill him a long time ago if he knew he was supposed to be king. But I think he's got he knows he's been disobedient, and God's going to take the kingdom from him and his family because of his disobedience, and he sees it. One of the possible successors is David, and probably the most eligible and most likely is David. So he says, if I get rid of David, that'll buy us some more time maybe. And that's what he's telling Jonathan. He says, David, it'd be a lot easier for David to become king than you. So if we get rid of David, then it'd be easier for you to become king, which we know that's not what God's plan is. But that's what, again, Saul doesn't know all those details. And from a carnal perspective, I guess that's how we would think. We'd see that David growing in his greatness with the people, and we say, hey, he's going to be a problem. It's like with Pharaoh with the Israelites. He saw the Israelites growing, and he said, we got to stop this. God's going to keep blessing them. They're going to keep growing, and eventually they'll be able to overtake us. And so he started trying to stop that. And I think that's what Saul, he sees the same thing with David. And he says, I got to stop this. Of course, it's God's plan, it's God's will. There ain't no stopping it. But Saul's going to try everything he can. And that's what he's trying to make Jonathan realize that. But I think Jonathan would rather David, if that's God's will and God's plan, he would rather David be the king and rather God's will be done than him be king. And we see that from, I don't think Jonathan, there's no jealousy between David and Jonathan. You remember back, when David and Jonathan first became friends, what Jonathan gave David the best that he had, gave him his clothes and his armor, and wanted to bless him and try to help prepare him to succeed, because he was new there, and remember, Jonathan and David loved each other. So, but Saul doesn't, Saul's jealous. Saul's only worried about himself, and we see that here in the next couple of verses. So, and here's Jonathan's response to Saul. He says, and Jonathan answered Saul his father and said unto him, wherefore shall he be slain? What hath he done? So the first thing Jonathan does, Saul says, go get David. I'm going to kill him. And you see Jonathan. He stands and I think he's probably they're probably in front of everybody. Because they're sitting there, everybody's eating together, and here Jonathan jumps up and questions the king. That really set Saul off, because you're going, not only are you questioning, you're going to do it in front of all these people. If you came to decide after and said, ask me this question, and I believe that's what he did before. Remember, before when Saul got everybody together and said, I want y'all to kill David. Jonathan went to him the next day, kind of privately, and said, you have no reason to kill David. Why do you want to kill David? And convinced him, to stop and not kill him. And here we see that, Jonathan. I think Jonathan just he's because he's already talked to David, and he knows David is. David's already told him his dad's trying to kill him. Now he hears it from his dad's voice. Hey, so he's saying, what has David done? There is no reason to kill David, and which again, Jonathan, he's in the right for questioning him. Maybe if he did a little bit different, it wouldn't have made Saul so mad. But he is trying to make Saul realize that David's done nothing wrong. You have no reason. If you do have a reason, why don't you lay that out for us and give us the justification for killing him? Of course, the king, he don't have to have that, but really, Saul as a leader, if he's willing to kill David, then that should open everybody else's eyes up and say, hey, we're all a step away from death. That's what David said earlier in the chapter. If Saul's mad at us tomorrow, then we'll be on the chopping block and we'll be gone. Even if we don't do anything wrong. And that's what I believe one of the reasons Saul or Jonathan is so. He's trying to say, hey, and him addressing Saul this way in front of everybody makes them realize that, and maybe Saul understands that, and he's mad at Jonathan now, and now we see verse 33 says, and Saul cast a javelin at him to smite him, whereby Jonathan knew that it was determined of his father to slay David. So when Jonathan questioned Saul in front of everybody and told him, trying to make him realize, hey, David has he's not done anything wrong to you. Then what did Saul? He tries to throw a javelin at him and kill him, and this is the same thing he's done to David. I think he's done at least 3 times to David, and so now Jonathan knows for a fact. He says, he's mad enough at David that he's willing to kill me to get to David. And so, of course, that opened Jonathan's eyes and made him realize, hey, I could have just died because of my dad's jealousy of David, and now, he's threw a javelin at me and he missed. Thank the Lord he missed me. But now he knows for sure, and there is no. Before he was able to convince Saul not to kill David, and he knows for a fact now. He says, I'm not going to be able to change his mind this time. He's dead set on it. Nothing's going to stop him this time. So he's probably fixing to take every resource he's got and put it into killing David. So I need to go tell David and warn David. So verse 34 says, so Jonathan arose from the table in fierce anger, and did eat no meat the 2nd day of the month. For he was grieved for David, because his father had done him shame. So, so Jonathan, he left before they ever got food, and he didn't eat that whole day. So, he was grieved, and he couldn't eat because of, he didn't want Saul and David fighting, because his best friend and his dad, and it's a tough decision for Jonathan to have to choose between the two, because he loves his dad and he loved David, and now he sees his dad doing wrong, and he has to choose his dad, or he has to choose David over his father because of his dad's sin, and it grieved him a lot. It's not what he wanted, and he's kind of ashamed of his father's behavior. He's saying that, Dad, David's been great to you. He's been faithful, served you. He's led your armies into battle, even when you did him wrong. You treated him wrong, you treated him bad, and he's been faithful, and he kept coming back and kept, honoring his commitments and just being faithful and serving under you and doing what you needed him to do. And now you want to return that and kill him. It's basically you're going to get rid of him, and reward his faithfulness with wickedness. And so Jonathan's ashamed of that. And you know, anytime our family turns away from God or does something wrong, we want them to do right, want them to follow God, want them to serve God. But when they don't do that, it hurts us. But and we, we want them to do that because we know God will bless them and take care of them, and they need to be faithful and serving God. And they're not always going to do that. And the best thing we can do is pray for them and pray that they'll realize their mistake and they'll ask God to forgive them, and they'll overcome it before it overtakes them like it does Saul. So let's see. Verse 35 says, and it came to pass in the morning that Jonathan went out into the field at the time appointed with David, and a little lad with him. So Jonathan now knows his answer, and he says, I got to go and communicate the results to David and tell him what to do. And they'd set up a time. And when they were doing their plan, we didn't really see this, but now we see that Jonathan had set up a time and said, I'll come at this time, and this is when I'll give you the message. And that's what we see here, because it says he had an appointed time here to warn David and to give him the message. And so he goes out, and it's a hard thing for him to go and tell David, hey, my dad's trying to kill you. You got to run. Because now, the fellowship he has with they're it's going to affect their how they're able to spend time with each other. Because now David's going to have to run and be running for his life. So him and Jonathan are going to be able to be friends, and well, they're still going to be friends, but they ain't gonna be able to do things together, and David's not gonna be in the kingdom anymore because they're gonna be running, and so that's not what Jonathan wanted. So let's see, verse 36 says, and he said unto his lad, Run, find out now the arrows which I shoot. So he's telling the lad, I'm gonna shoot these arrows, and I want you to go and find them. So he shoots them, and then now the rest of verse 36 says, and as the lad ran, he shot an arrow beyond him. So, whenever the lad's out there running, I'm glad I'm not the lad. He's out there running around in the field, and Jonathan's shooting a bow. You'd hate for him to have a stray arrow and him miss. I'd say, you shoot first, and then I'll go out there and get him. But I don't know, maybe they did it this way. But I'm sure Jonathan was, he's very accurate with his bow. They had to have it in their as part of their artillery, how they fought the battles, and they used it in war. So he's pretty accurate with it. But still, I'd be hesitant. Maybe this lad's helped him before, and he's got confidence that Jonathan can hit what he's aiming at. But evidently the lad does, because rest of verse 36 says, and as the lad ran, he shot an arrow. But so Jonathan said, go out there, I'm going to shoot these arrows, you get them. And the lad don't hesitate, he takes off and goes. So but I'd be a little hesitant, I think. Even if I was Jonathan shooting the bow, I'd be hesitant, because you can always make a mistake, and especially with a bow and arrow, you let your finger slip or something like that, and the arrow goes haywire, and but he says, I'll shoot one, I'll lob it over his head and miss the target and tell him to go fetch it. Verse 37 says, and when the lad was come to the place of the arrow which Jonathan had shot, Jonathan cried after the lad and said, Is not the arrow beyond thee? So, he shot when the lad got close to it. He's probably trying to look for it, and Jonathan says, it's beyond thee. So his signal, his message to David is, you got to run, you got to get out of here. So that was their signal for David in trouble was, I'll tell the lad the arrow's beyond him, and that's what we see here. So verse 37 says, and when the lad was come to the place of the arrow which Jonathan had shot, I already read that. Verse 38 says, and Jonathan cried after the lad, Make speed, haste, stay not. So now we didn't see this and again, we didn't see this in Jonathan and David's original communication, but we see Jonathan adding some details here and additional information to the message, and I'm sure David got the point. He said, make speed, haste, stay not. That's saying, the arrows are behind you. You got to get out of here, and you need to do it fast. It's worse than we thought. We talked about it, and we thought that my dad might be mad at you. He might be trying to kill you, but it's a dead sure fact now, and he's going to do everything he can. So you need to get out of here, and you need to run, and don't slow down. Just go, make haste. Verse 38 says, and Jonathan's lad gathered up the arrows and came to his master. So, so now David's hid out in the field. He's got a good hiding spot where the lad can't see him. So the lad finishes gathering up all the arrows and getting all of them, out of the field. And now he comes back and brings them to Jonathan. So he thinks they're done. And verse 39 says, but the lad knew not anything, only Jonathan and David knew the matter. So that's what I'm saying. David's hid out good enough that the lad ain't gonna find him. David's a soldier; he knows how to get out in the field and hide and not be seen. So he's out there, and the lad never sees him. So, and it's important the lad doesn't know, because the lad could go back and tell Saul, and then Saul or Jonathan and David both will be in trouble. So the lad goes, and he doesn't see David. And you picture him out in the field looking for arrows. I mean, it'd be maybe easy to see somebody hiding out, but he doesn't do that. And again, he's probably one of the soldiers too, or he's helped with the soldiers and helped Jonathan before, so he's got an idea of what to look for and things like that. But he didn't find out anything, so there's nobody to pass the information back to Saul. Let's see, verse 40 says, and Jonathan gave his artillery unto this lad, and said unto him, go carry them into the city. So what Jonathan does is he gives all this stuff to the lad, and he says, take all this stuff back to the city, and go back, and I'll come later. You just go ahead and go take all the stuff and put it up, and I'll be back in a little while. So you go ahead and go, and I'll be there soon. So now verse 41 says, and as soon as the lad was gone, David arose out of a place toward the south, and fell on his face to the ground, and bowed himself 3 times, and they kissed one another, and wept with another, until David exceeded. So what it's saying is, once the lad was gone, David, he snuck up there and came to Jonathan so they could talk and kind of have tell each other goodbye, because they knew what this meant. Again, this is what I alluded to earlier, is now David and Jonathan, they're great friends. They do stuff together, and they fight battles together. They probably train together. Spend time, probably have family get-togethers, and they're great friends. And now all that's going to stop, and so now not only are they going to be friends, but now David's going to have to run and be on the be on the lookout for his life for until Saul decides to stop, and Saul chases him a good while. But again, and Jonathan is sad, not only because his friend's going to be gone, but now now his friend's going to have to live a life of hiding out. He knows it's going to be hard for David, and the king. David's not going to be able to get any help either, and anybody David tries to get help from, anybody that tries to help David, they know that and we'll see that some people get killed because they help David. But the people are going to know that and say, David's only going to have a little bit before the word gets out that Saul is hunting David and trying to find him. So that's going to put a stop to any help he gets. And we'll see next week. He gets he goes and tells the what's his name, Ahimelech, that he's on a secret mission kind of, and we'll see that next week. But Saul and David, they know that. They know life's fixing to be hard for both of them. They're going to go from being able to fellowship and hang out and do things together, and now all that's going to go away. And David, he's thankful for Jonathan, and he really appreciates what Jonathan did, and that's why we see, he's bowing down and doing those things, and now they're grieved. But David is appreciative of what Jonathan did, and Jonathan took a great risk of sticking his neck out for David, because what would Saul tried to kill him, whenever he questioned, what proof he had that David needed, or what, why he wanted to kill David, and Saul just, he tried to kill him. So, there's a great risk that Jonathan took, so David is appreciative of it. Verse 42 says, "And Jonathan said to David, Go in peace, forasmuch as we have sworn, both of us, in the name of the Lord, saying, The Lord be between me and thee, and between my seed and thy seed forever. And he arose and departed, and Jonathan went into the city." So, again, this is what I was alluding to earlier. They I think at this point they think they're probably never going to see each other again. So, they're making they're saying their goodbyes. They say, it's going to be tough, but no matter what happens, we've agreed to, we made a commitment to each other to help each other as much as we can, and not only if one of us dies, then the other one will help pass that. We'll take care of the other one's descendants, and we'll do everything we can to help them out. And we'll see that later on. David does that with Jonathan's son. I think it's Mephibosheth, I think is how you say it. But David blesses him greatly, and he's crippled, and David, he seeks out, not he doesn't just, this is how great a friend, he doesn't just wait until one of Jonathan's descendants comes and asks for help. He starts going and looking for him and says, is there any of Saul's seed left? And he finds out there is Jonathan has a son, and whenever he finds out, he goes to him. The guy didn't come to David asking for a handout. David found him and blessed him, just because he wanted to be a blessing to Jonathan, and he knew that he had made a commitment with Jonathan, and he loved Jonathan, and he wanted to be a blessing to his descendants. So anyway, again, just great friendship that David and Jonathan had, and so, and we see that the sorrow that they have, that now David's going to have to start running and be in fear for his life, but they know that's what's going to happen, what they got to go through, and they got to fight through and get through it, and that's what they do. So David goes, and goes his way, and then Jonathan goes back to the city. So, we'll stop there for today. We don't have time to start chapter 21, but we see now that David he's got 100% confirmation that Saul wants to kill him, and that he needs to get out of there before Saul catches him and he dies. So he goes and runs, and he's going to be on the run for a little while now, and I guess again we know that one thing about this is you got to put yourself in David's shoes and think, Samuel said, I'm going to be king. He said, God's going to make me king, and I'm going to be anointed king. So, why can't God just wipe Saul out and put me in the kingdom? Why do I got to go and run and fear for my life when I'm the one that's supposed to be king? And, he didn't question. He knew God could take care of him. He said, well, I just got to, God will take care of Saul whenever, his plan is for Saul to die, and I'll have to wait until that happens. Again, I think a lot of us would get, we would put ourselves in David's shoes. Say, well, we're a great warrior. We'll just go and kill Saul, and we can take the kingdom. And that could have happened during this time. But because if you read through some of these books, that's what happens. Sometimes the servants kill the king, and they take the kingdom, and they become king, and it's just what happened. And I think we talked a little bit about that a couple of weeks ago, where maybe Saul was fearful that David would do this, but David knew God had a plan, God had a timeline, and it was God's will. If it's God's will for him to live in the kingdom and be at peace, and that's what he's going to do. If it's God's will for him to have to run and fight, then that's what he was going to do. And he knew it wasn't God's will for him to go and kill Saul. And we'll find out later, because he knew that God anointed Saul king, and it's God's responsibility to remove the king or take care of Saul in his plan. And that's what David said. Well, I won't get into all the details. We ain't got time to discuss all that, but we'll see that later on. David understood the significance of waiting on God and doing God's plan and following God's will, and just letting things work out the way God's got them planned. And he didn't, again, if it meant he had to run and hide out and we'll see it even later on with, now I can't think of his son's name. If I wouldn't have said something, I'd know it. But when David's son takes over the kingdom, David has to pack up and leave the kingdom. He goes and has to go on the run again because his son's trying to kill him. I think it's Absalom. I get his sons mixed up, but I think Absalom is the one that tries to overtake his kingdom, and he has to flee and hide out in the woods again. Being the king, he is the king then, and he still has to do it. But again, he just said, okay, that's what God wants me to do. I'll go and do it, and that's how God's going to take care of it and do it. Then that's what we'll do. So anyway, I think now I'm just rambling on. But we'll see some of those things later on. Thank y'all for coming this morning and listening to us. As usual, I would like to invite everybody to come to church with us. We're going to have a special Easter service this morning, so you can come and join us. We'd love to have you. We have our in-person Sunday school at 10. We have church at 11. We have church tonight at 6, and church again on Wednesday nights at 7. If anybody can come and join us, we'd love to have you. If not, hopefully we'll see you here next week. Pray everybody has a blessed week, and everything goes well for you this week. So I'm going to close this in a word of prayer, and then I'll cut the video off. Dear God, I come to you today. Thank you for giving us your word, Lord. Dear Lord, thank you for giving us great examples to study and to see how great men in the past have served you and followed you and just trusted in you, dear Lord. And just pray that you let us be able to do that in our lives, dear God. Just pray that you lead, guide, and direct us. Pray that you bless the church services today, dear Lord. And we just thank you for all your many blessings. In Jesus' holy, precious name we pray. Amen.